I'm here today to talk about how a short-term political culture addresses a long-term challenge. I'm going to draw on some examples from reporting. I think maybe calling it short-term political culture is a little bit generous at this point, but we'll get into that. So I'm going to go when we think about short-term thinking in Washington or short-term planning in Washington. We're thinking about, okay, administrations are, 4 to 8 years, 1 term, 2 terms, so it's harder to think in decades, right? One good example of this is the Global Change Research Program, or GCRP, if you need another acronym. Congress, there was agreement that the federal government needs to, across agencies, pay attention to how the climate is changing, although you notice they did not put climate in the headline, right? Or in the title. Really just the plan is to look at, across the federal government, how is the climate changing? What do federal agencies need to do? Modeling out what might happen. And this actually involves 14 federal agencies. So everything from USDA, NASA, DOD, EPA. And this is also the entity that produces the National Climate Assessments, which many of you are probably familiar with. These come out every 4 years, or they're supposed to. And it's really spread out across the federal government. I think this has helped keep this work going forward. That's not to say there have not been challenges. There have, especially during the Trump administration. You had a lot of senior officials trying to kind of derail or at least water down this report. But as you can see from the other headline I have up here from the New York Times, those efforts ultimately did not work. And I think part of that is because of how spread out and how diffuse the work was across federal agencies. It made it much more difficult to axe it completely or to really meddle with the results of it. There was still drama. I think a few people either resigned or lost their job in protest. It was not without drama, but ultimately the assessment came out as it was intended to. It was science-based, and the Trump administration did decide, however, to release it the day after Thanksgiving. So that was an attempt to bury it, but actually news outlets saw that and said, okay, we're going to give it extra coverage. So it kind of backfired. But I think that's one good example of where you can kind of embed work and decentralize it in a way that can set it up for longer term progress.
Expertise has become disaster impact analysis, and particularly what disasters do to production agriculture here in Florida. So while I can pretty quickly collect data on where a storm path has happened, and I can collect information from the National Weather Service on precipitation and some other agencies on flooding, it doesn't tell me what happened to agriculture to tell us, when this exact amount of wind, precipitation, and level of flooding happened. It's very event specific, so we need to collect that data from the field. One of the things that we learned when we first put the survey out with Hurricane Michael was, as data scientists, we really want to collect as much information as we can, ask as many questions as we can, and nobody wants to answer that many questions, especially when they've just been impacted by a storm. So we learned to reorganize the survey to collect the information that we really needed. There's nursery and greenhouse structures, irrigation systems, roads, ditches, stormwater impoundments, all of this infrastructure. If it is damaged, it can affect things on into the future of how these growers are impacted in not only this season, but future seasons. And what we've learned is that decision makers need this information. So it's really important to know that the impacts are going to be different depending on when the event happens for a particular area. And so what the event impacts really matters. If it's a small area, but an area that has really high value crop on it, that's going to be just as large of an impact as a large area that has a lower value crop. This is just letting you know that we're working towards what I call state-of-the-art agricultural impact tools, where we can get to some of that information that we're not able to get at right now, and kind of tip those scales on rapid response of information versus sharing a lot of detailed information.
So let me talk about technology and AI and the usefulness to address food and crop security. When we think of population growth and the need for increase of food production system, there are tremendous tasks ahead of us, as well as Also the impacts from global climate change, droughts, floods, and disasters, like was just talked about. Crops depend on soil, more so than soil on crops. Precision agriculture and advancements in soil and crop health sensing, nutrient sensing technology, and Internet of Things have been suggested to address issues and bolster soil security and food security, in particular to stabilize crop yield and productivity. Now, in terms of precision agriculture, we have made a lot of progress. But so what we are facing is other types of agricultural systems. For example, smallholder farm systems in southern India face different types of challenges, very different limitations imposed by technology access. Now, what am I talking about here? Soil health monitoring through sensor technology, and these type of systems become quite powerful and complex. These technologies allow sensing of multiple properties simultaneously through the help of AI technologies, and sometimes also in combination with earth sensing systems that have the ability to characterize the whole agro-ecosystem, but also allow inferences on below-ground properties that relate to soil and crop health. Integrated into data hypercubes, harmonized hundreds of environmental covariates, allow digital twin development for soil health, crop health, and agriculture. And there are a variety of very powerful AI-driven tools that rely on machine learning and deep learning technology. We have the computational capacities, like for example here at UF, the Hypergator system that allows immense processing of massive data amounts. But as we see, the geographic distribution is quite unbalanced and uneven, with sparse measurements in Africa and lack in data in Asia in particular stand out, limiting these type of global developments. So the important point to be made relates to ownership. Who owns these type of models that are generated by AI? Most research publications are inaccessible to most farmers, in particular in resource-limited countries. So a digital divide between AI modelers and the stakeholders, the people that really crop the land on the ground, is quite evident. There's also the concern about global big brother is watching approach through sensing systems that jeopardize the privacy of data, but also enable control and manipulation of prices that really limit the poor of the poor, particularly smallholder farmers. So collaboration with private industry comes to the fore.